Hello everyone, it's time for another live look at the astrology. My name is Katie Sweetman, and this is your look at the astrology for February 16th through 22nd, 2026. So we have a lot going on astrologically. I don't know if you've looked outside or sort of looked at what's going on in the sky at the moment. And I did talk about this last week. We had Saturn go into Aries, so that in and of itself says that February is a big month. It says that there's a priority shift, a shift in focus in our lives that will actually unfold over the next 2 years until April 2028. Okay, but it's not just Saturn and Aries this month. So this week, tomorrow, we have a new moon. This new moon is the Aquarius solar eclipse. So yes, we are going to have an eclipse. And if you have been around these parts at all, you know that eclipse season is also a big time. It says that we've come to a crossroads. It's a time for new beginnings. Sometimes we can see events around the eclipses or points that evoke the eclipses. So there's that. Side note, it's Lunar New Year, it's Ramadan, it's Mardi Gras, it's all the things that are taking place on this new moon. But this new moon will spotlight Saturn in Aries, and it also will spotlight Neptune in Aries. So this week on Friday the 20th, we have a very rare Saturn-Neptune conjunction. So I'm going to try to figure out how to talk about all these things and not have it be very, very long. But like I said, we have a lot to talk about. So for those that are watching live, say hello. And if you don't know who I am, my name is Katie Sweetman, and I'm an astrologer and psychic medium located here in the rolling hills of Central Maryland. And every week we gather live to look at the astrology. You hear me say it every week. The astrology is 50%. You are the other 50%. Let's not forget that. Astrology is just time. It's a container for the energy of time. It's how we live time. And I've spoken a lot about the zodiac over the successive weeks that we meet. We have this chat over, it's a little bit one-sided because sometimes you're my clients and you say, I feel like I know you. I feel like I see you every week. And I'm like, I'm just meeting you for the first time. So do say hello. Let me know where you are watching from. It's just fun to see. I know we're an international audience, so it's fun to see where in the world we are all connecting from. So what I was trying to say is that over the successive, let's say, weeks that we've done this, I talk about how the zodiac is in a way like a ladder. It's the wheel of life. It is a wheel, but there is a sense of progression from each sign to the next. In fact, each sign supports the next. And there's a sense of progression. When we got to Saturn and Aries, we got to the Saturn, Neptune, not Saturn, Neptune, sorry, to take my brain back to Saturn and Pisces, where Saturn was in Pisces from March of 2023 until just this past Friday, February 13th. And so we went through this big, long arc. Depending on how old you are, you remember when we started the story way back in April of 1996, and we have made one great rotation on the wheel. Versus, let's say, every year the sun makes one rotation, but it's not the same as 30 years. And so each sign, as Saturn goes into each sign of the zodiac, it teaches us about life. Maybe to be a better person. It's not handed to us, but it teaches us lessons. It teaches us to reach for a better version of ourselves. It teaches us about accountability and right and wrong. And there's a sense with Saturn, of course, this is in its positive expression, that we are building our lives with Saturn. We need Saturn. Saturn really tells us that over time, we become whatever it is that we are trying or searching to become. And sometimes who we are becoming is not what we always can see about ourselves. And so Neptune on the brain. Saturn is mentorship, it's leadership, and of course, there is a duality to all the planets and all the signs of the zodiac. So, Saturn does have a very heavy side, But let's not forget that there is mentorship, there is leadership, there is construction and building and things becoming solid with Saturn. So the last 3 years, we've been in a very liminal space because Saturn has been doing that work through a sign that is inherently immaterial. Pisces is a spiritual sign. Doesn't mean every Pisces is spiritual. I know sometimes people say, well, but so-and-so person in my life is a Pisces and they are not compassionate, they are not nice. And I'm like, look, it's an archetype. Doesn't mean we all live up to the highest expression of the archetype, but it's there to teach us about compassion, about understanding, about empathy, and a lot of other things. So now that Saturn is in Aries, we are learning about Aries, new beginnings, initiative, action, forward movement, being able to stand on our own 2 feet. There's a sense of individuality with I keep wanting to say Neptune, with Saturn and Aries. Do keep in mind, I probably spoke about this last week, that classically speaking, Saturn is in its detriment. It's in its fall in Aries. And this is a little bit of a technical point, but it's important to note, and especially to reach for the medicine over the next couple of years, because Saturn also has a streak of individualism when it's in Aries. And we cannot be so individualistic that we lose sight of other people, that we become so self-reliant that we're trying to do everything on our own. I remember during the pandemic, I was in New York City and I'm like trying to put together this like big wooden bed by myself, and I remember thinking, this is like the last time in my life that I'm going to like try to lift things and do things all by myself. But then again, I'm sort of good at that. But I think there's a lesson to be learned with Saturn and Aries. It's not to be so self-reliant, it's not to be so individualistic that we lose sight of other people. We forget to ask for help, for example, because Saturn is in its exaltation in Libra, and Libra is on the other side of the zodiac. So we got 15 years before we can get to Saturn and Libra. But it's just a reminder, and we'll keep coming back to this over the coming weeks and over the coming next 2 years, to really reach for the balance with Saturn and Aries. So we are in a new time, a new part of your life. You can re-listen to last week's explanation. A new part of your life now demands attention, focus, accountability, authority, putting things in order. It depends on what part of your life. And I know that I wrote all about Saturn and Aries. There's two links in the show notes. There's more of a longer explanation of Saturn and Aries. And there's also a sign-by-sign guide that you can look at your own sign. But last week, people were like, well, I don't have anything in Aries, or in the case of the upcoming eclipse, I don't have anything in Aquarius. And very likely you do not have anything in these 2 signs. But going back to that earlier comment about how the zodiac is a wheel, it's a ladder, each sign of the zodiac is a facet of your life. It could be your career, it could be relationships. So even if you have nothing in Aries, somebody said like, relationships, I'm happily single, I don't want a relationship. And like, Saturn's not forcing you to get into a relationship. Sometimes when Saturn gets into the relationship sign, in this case Aries for Libra, it is a time of new beginnings in relationships, but it's also a time to remind us that you can't do life alone. You have to work on your social skills. It's about connecting with other people. So even as you hear about Saturn and Aries, or even Neptune, or even the eclipse, it's to listen for how it is relevant in your own life. Because astrology, it follows the storyline. It follows the storyline of your life. By and large, with some exceptions, nothing is radically coming out of the blue. Like I said, there is still life, but typically the eclipse, or the case of Saturn and Aries, it's kind of following a pre-established narrative. Of course, you have free will. That's the part that's on you. So if you know that it's a time to focus on a new part of your life, it could be health, it could be career, it could be relationships, what steps and what actions are you going to take? That's the part that's on you. And just as a little side note, because somebody was asking about this over on Spotify, yes, you can listen to me on Spotify. There is something called hemispheres in the zodiac. I mentioned this in the case of Libra, that Saturn was going into the top half of the chart. Somebody said, what is the top half of the chart? keep in mind that Saturn is about time. It's about how you live time on a much larger framework, and it's where the priorities of your life unfold. And sometimes the priorities of our life, it's not career, it's not our public life, it's home, it's family, it's putting down roots, and that's really where the priority and focus. So some signs have been in a longer arc where that's been the focus for, let's say, the last 5 years, last 10 years, and last 15 years. And so in the case of Libra, etc., Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, not Capricorn, sorry, I should have gone backwards. The other way, Virgo, and Leo, etc. So you're starting to get into a part of the astrology where Saturn is pushing you out into the world. That's where the focus and priority is. So just want to sort of quickly say that. But that said, we have a lot to talk about. So I already talked about Saturn Aries. So February 13th, 2026, all the way to, I think it's April 13th of 2028. And then we have a solar eclipse tomorrow. So this solar eclipse is going to be at 28 degrees of Aquarius. If you've been paying attention to the astrology, you're like, wait a second, we haven't been having eclipses in Aquarius. You are absolutely correct. This is our first eclipse in signs, Aquarius and Leo, that will unfold into 2028. So in addition to the new beginnings of Saturn and Aries, we also have the new beginnings of the eclipse, and we have the new beginnings of an eclipse in a new series of signs. So we're arcing out of the Pisces Virgo narrative that we've been having since 2024, the second half of 2024, and now we're beginning to go into a new eclipse-driven narrative that will take us into 2028. Eclipses happen every 6 months. We had an eclipse, I think it was September 21st, and they open up 6-month chapters. And it says that over a 6-month period, there's a lot of things happening within this space. So in the case of, let's say, September 21st, the eclipse was in Virgo. Virgo was our focus, and Virgo is a sign, it's an archetype, it's an energy. If you happen to be a Virgo or you have planets in Virgo, they get activated, they get spotlighted. And because life is not static, the eclipses are really pushing along the narrative. There's an interconnectivity and a synergy between Saturn and the eclipses, but that's a bigger conversation. And so the eclipses are saying, okay, for the next 6 months, this area of your life is going to see changes. And so that's, in the case of the eclipse tomorrow, that part of your life will see changes. The last time we had eclipses in Aquarius and Leo, this was 2017 and 18. I was thinking back to that time, and in Aquarius, depending on how I look at it, it's either my second or it's my third. And I started taking classes in French in 2017. I was working with a financial advisor. I was trying to plan for the future. So that's where that second house, second sign, third sign, things that were being highlighted. And this is just very surface level. Those things that I've shared, they're not dramatic, but they're saying that now is the time to focus. So the case, let's say, 8-9 years ago, I was focusing on financial issues. I was focusing on education and classes, and I was also learning and getting certifications in other classes as well. So that's sort of showing you how the eclipses change the narrative and sort of put it. And that's where the new beginnings and the changes are happening over a 6-month plus period. So this eclipse tomorrow that we are having, it's in Aquarius. Aquarius, there's a collective level of Aquarius. It's also the sign of the collective, but meaning astrology has the level that we're all experiencing because we're human beings on planet Earth. There's a level that we are experiencing as our own astrology. So that's the personal side. So Aquarius means something at the personal level of your astrology. And then on a collective level, Aquarius is the sign of community, friends, our social network. It's our sense of belonging to something greater. It sort of stands in contrast yet balance with Leo. Leo is the self and the individual and the ego. And Aquarius is like, but don't forget that we're part of a greater whole. That we're a part of a group, part of a collective. Aquarius is also social issues and social causes. It's society, it's humanity, It's the future. It's also a sign that gets us to wish for a better future and sometimes to take actionable steps, although Aquarius is typically more about sort of the ideology behind what the changes that we want to make. Aquarius is also science and technology, for example. It's also systems. The systems that run our, not just our lives, but the systems that run our communities, the system that runs our world. So these are just examples in how these themes are going to be collectively highlighted over the next 6 months. And Aquarius sort of puts into the forefront, in addition to the fact that Saturn is now in Aries, that we really need to focus on some bigger issues, social causes, and that this is the time, according to astrology. This eclipse is very interesting because it squares Uranus. And so if eclipse opens up a 6-month container of time that's going to be really focusing on the archetype and energy of Aquarius, it draws in the energy of Uranus and Taurus. A square creates a point of friction. There is a push, because Uranus is what's called an evolutionary planet, to evolve, to think differently, do things differently, to have a breakthrough. There is a sense of a need for adaptation over the next 6 months. And it's sort of, as life might sort of shift and change on us, how do we adapt? How do we build new structures, new systems? How do we come to new solutions? And so there's the sort of the genius and brilliant side of Aquarius that can help us have that, that light bulb go off and be like, what, maybe it's this way. But also Aquarius, or rather Uranus, can be a little bit disruptive. Ultimately, Uranus, one of its archetypes is that of Prometheus. And so there's a sense of having to see things that maybe we haven't seen before. But I should add, even though there's a lot of energy of new beginnings in this astrology of 2026, Uranus has been in Taurus since 2018 and 19. And so there's a sense of a story that is coming to the forefront in the next 6 months that in a way we've been experiencing it. We've had Uranus in Taurus since May of 2018 and March of 2019. Aquarius, and sometimes we forget this, it is a fixed sign. I know it sounds like water, Aquarius, aqua, but actually it's an air sign. It's fixed air. That's why it's about systems. But the other fixed signs are Taurus and Leo and Scorpio. And the fixed signs typically are the things that really root and anchor and ground us, both personally and collectively. And so something is beginning to shift about these things that are typically rooted and grounded over the next 6-month period. We will have to see. And so, of course, when we go through each of the 12 zodiac signs, you'll see where some of this energy is really being concentrated. This eclipse also points towards Saturn and Aries because Aquarius is ruled by Saturn in what's called the traditional ruler. I use traditional rulers. So the energy of the eclipse is received by Saturn at 0 Aries. 0 Aries is the first degree of the zodiac. It's sort of where things begin symbolically. It represents the spring equinox. So certainly when the sun goes into Aries each year in what's called tropical astrology, it is the start of the astrological year. Side note, other things that have been being talked about, there's 2 zodiacs. This is a bigger conversation, but sometimes people don't know that there is what's called the tropical western zodiac that is fixed to the equinox. There's also the sidereal zodiac that's fixed to more the actual position of the planets in the sky. That's used by Indian or Vedic astrology. There is no right or wrong. You choose the one that speaks to you. I'm just sort of putting that because sometimes people come on to my Facebook and they're like, oh, you're doing astrology wrong. I'm like, I'm doing Western astrology. And like I said, in the tropical or Western zodiac, with the new year begins at 0 Aries when the sun goes into Aries, the spring equinox. That's why the Chinese system, because I know tomorrow is Lunar New Year, they use a different system. The new year begins the second new moon after the winter solstice in the Northern Hemisphere. And in Western astrology, you don't start things with the Aquarius new moon. You see what I mean? It's when the sun goes into Aries, it's the start of the zodiac, not when you have the Aries new moon, which moves and changes. And that's why Chinese New Year moves and changes each year. So anyway, let's get back on track. So eclipse, 28 degrees of Aquarius, and the energy is received by Saturn at 0 Aries. It's a very powerful point in the zodiac. It says not just Aquarius, not just the energies of Uranus, but the energies of new beginnings. If the internet is believed, I didn't go this deep into what's called the ephemeris, but allegedly the last time we had Saturn at 0 degrees, Saturn-Neptune conjunction at 0 degrees of Aries was like 9,000 years ago. It's possible. Certainly not in our lifetime. The last time we had Saturn, Neptune, and Aries conjunct was the early 1700s, so very long time ago. But so the energy is received, and so we have another, big energy that's with us over the next 6 months. That's about new beginnings. And the energy is also received by Neptune, because this week Saturn and Neptune come together. They haven't been conjunct since 1989, but this time it's in Aries, and it's at 0 Aries. So Neptune's a little bit of the wild card for me, because Neptune is so ethereal. It kind of works like the moon. It's emotion, it's feeling, it's sensation, it can cloud, but it can also help us to rise, to transcend, to heal, to have compassion. So there's those big highs and lows with Neptune. And so we've never experienced this before. I mean, we had Neptune in Aries in 2025 for, I think it was like a 5-month preview from, I think, end of March to October, but we haven't lived with Neptune in Aries. So that's a little bit of the question mark that I have as an astrologer, because over the next 6 months, the sort of the point of energy in the sky that's really driving our experiences for the next 6 months is Saturn and Neptune. And Saturn is the material world, it's matter, it's time, it's structures, and Neptune dissolves. Or you could say that we need to take action, Aries, but in alignment with Neptune. Because when we feel things and we can see things and maybe how our actions are impacting other people, maybe we make different choices. I don't know. So there's a deep sensitizing influence that is present throughout the next 6 months. And the thing with eclipses is that whereas February is likely a crossroads for us, we quite possibly will see either events or a shift in the narrative of our lives. If we don't, and sometimes it's very quiet, we have to sort of see where we get activations of the eclipse. Sometimes it's the next new moon after the eclipse, so this will be in March. Sometimes it's when, in the case of this astrology, Mars is going to go into Aries on April 9th. And then in May, we will be 3 months after the eclipse, and then 3 months before the solar eclipse on August 12th of 2026. So there's points in which we may see it, but not all signs will feel it. And like I said, using some examples from, say, 8 or 9 years ago, personal examples, maybe it's not dramatic. It's just sort of moving the narrative to a new part of our lives. So Saturn-Neptune conjunction this week, February 20th. This will be at 0 Aries, as I was saying. It's planting a seed. Conjunctions plant a seed. And as I was saying, even for the energies of the eclipse, it may be a little bit before we get a little bit more of a understanding what this Saturn-Neptune conjunction means for all of us. And then it's Pisces season this week, and that's something that really I should push to next week, because it's just too much to talk about. But of course, happy birthday, Pisces. So the sun goes into Pisces on February 18th, and Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac. So Pisces, just sort of briefly, because there's, tomorrow is the Lunar New Year. It's not part of the Western astrological tradition because it uses a different calendar, but 1 billion people celebrate Lunar New Year, for example. But the astrological New Year is not until March 20th this year, at least on my side of the world. And that is what starts the astrology calendar. But even in those other cultures, I think in either Persia or Zoroastrianism, they celebrate the new year with the sun going into Aries. So anyway, Lots to talk about. So we will talk more about Pisces season next week. Again, we've got Saturn in Aries, we've got Saturn-Neptune conjunction this week, and we've got the solar eclipse tomorrow, February 17th. So that is a lot. And I also want to mention before I forget, I am doing a weekend Module 1 intensive of energetic sciences. If you may recall, I did a 1-hour free introduction on February 5th. It was recorded. You can still watch it. In this introduction, I talk about some of the bigger philosophical points. I open up this idea that we are both physical beings and non-physical beings. And if we are physical and non-physical beings, what is around us? How are we being influenced by the energies? And in this module 1, we're going to learn about the weft. The weft is the invisible fabric that connects everyone and everything, how very Neptunian. And we're going to learn to feel the weft, to really understand the biomechanics around shifting our consciousness just with rising energies and the position of our eyes. That's all. And also to connect to a higher positioning of consciousness, and to also feel again this weft, and to really understand what really connects everyone and everything, and more importantly, to really rise the consciousness. And it's through certain practices, and we do it with like a really brief version of that practice at the end of the introduction. You can become like an acupuncture needle for the planet. So this module 1 is going to be from 11 a.m. Eastern to 5 p.m. Eastern both days, so the 21st and 22nd of February. It is hosted by Mercia Academy in Switzerland. This is I got that certification during the last Aquarius Leo eclipses, but I've been teaching for them since 2018, and it's something that's a big, runs parallel to my work as an astrologer, and I love being able to share it with you, and I hope that you can join me this coming weekend. It will be recorded for replay. So watch the introduction if you want to learn more about energy and consciousness. And we don't go into the chakras, but these sort of energetic points, these energetic centers on our body, and what is it all connected to. So there you go. Let's look at each of the 12 zodiac signs, starting with Aries. So Aries, big time in your astrology. You now have Saturn in Aries. So when we spoke last week, Saturn hadn't quite gotten to Aries. And so how are you feeling? How are you feeling this energy? And what this means is that for the next 2 years, and you did have a preview of this in June and July of August of 2025, that what this means is that you're in a period of your life where more is being required of you. It could be more commitment, more accountability, to reach for a better version of yourself, to navigate personal milestones and achievements. And with Saturn in your sign, what do you want to build? What do you want to create? What is the better version of yourself? So listen for Saturn in Aries. Maybe you already sense it. Maybe you feel the shift. Maybe more is being asked of you. But listen for Saturn in Aries, because whatever is going on in your life is likely very particular to your own life. But in general, Saturn asks for accountability. It asks for maturity. It asks for following through and showing up and doing the right thing and being more upstanding. And that's where Saturn really asks more of us, and in a more, let's say, a positive way of having Saturn. But that said, there are lessons to be learned, and lessons around how you take action or how you don't take action, or how you show up or how you don't show up. And again, it's to begin to listen for Saturn in your sign. Saturn also conjuncts Neptune, and as I was saying in the introduction, that's a little bit more subtle. I think to some degree we need to sort of continue to sit with Saturn and Neptune and sort of listen for what this means for us. And it might not be until Mars gets into Aries and in April 9th throughout May that we really see what this time is about. But it's new beginnings, and it's really shifting the focus in your life. So we have Saturn now in Aries, and we also have this solar eclipse. So this is kind of a big deal. It's not, let's say, depending on how you look at it, it's not hitting on big points like it is some of the other signs. However, but I'll get back to that. This is an eclipse in something called your 11th. It says that over the next 6 months, your sort of immediate focus and priority is your friends. This could mean that you need to look at who you're friends with, or growing your social circle, meeting new people. It could also involve groups, service, helping other people, but also larger social issues and social causes. So that's where a lot of the change is happening. And keep in mind, this is actually a much bigger conversation, but I just want to sort of plant this seed, that this is the same space that Pluto went into back in March of 2023 and then was fully into by November 2024. And so whatever the eclipse is activating, it's also activating Pluto, although kind of at opposite ends at the moment. And so it's to really talk about how friends and community and your relationship with belonging and how you show up, all of that is beginning to shift in general. This is an eclipse that says to some degree something is changing and transforming over the next 6 months, and maybe things look a bit different. Let me go back to the thing that I put a pin in very quickly. So I said that this is not really activating your chart like the other signs, but in a way it is, because the ruler of this eclipse is Saturn. Saturn is in Aries, and so you could possibly say with this eclipse that this is about, what are you doing? What is the role that you're playing in the world? How are you showing up? And maybe there will be something over the next 6 months that asks you to participate, to take action. Saturn is now in your sign. I remember the first time I taught a class, I show up in the room, everybody's sort of doing their thing, and I'm sort of hanging out, and I'm like, wait a second, they're here for me. I'm the one teaching the class. So I had to sort of put myself into a very different sort of mode of thinking, to go from sort of, let's say, the student to the teacher. So how will you answer that call over the next 6 months? Because something may be asked of you. You may be required to participate more. That could be in your community. That could be within your social circle. But the energy of this eclipse points towards you. It points towards Saturn. And Saturn typically says it's time to take the next big step up in your life. Taurus. So Venus is your planet, and Venus, I believe it's since last week. It was, I'm looking at July's astrology. It's not July. It's since the 10th of February. Venus has been in Pisces. And so Venus will actually be in Pisces all the way till March 6th. And so right now, the energy of your sign is really concentrated on something called your 11th. It's your social circle, it's your friends, it's your community. Keep in mind, Saturn was in this space for 3 years. Saturn's not there right now, but Venus, your planet, is occupying a space where you had to do a lot of heavy lifting, a lot of work over the last 3 years. So I would say, maybe Venus is to capitalize to some degree on what you have been working and building the past few years. Venus also in this part of your chart is trying to get you to look towards the future, to vision, to plan, to hope, to dream. And for some Tauruses, because there is a sense of service with Pisces, there is a push to be of service to your community, to help, and maybe to help people who are less fortunate. Then there's Saturn in Aries. Saturn is now in something called your 12th. So your priority, your long-term priority for the next 2 years is either your spirituality, to go beyond this world, to ask bigger questions, to look within, to let go. Sometimes Saturn the 12th is deep healing. People get sober when Saturn goes to the 12th. People retreat, they go inward, but it's to really build that inner world and build that connection to whatever it is beyond this world. It could be your higher self, it could be your intuition. You have to start to feel into what Saturn is starting to show you in your life. Then there is this eclipse. This is actually a big eclipse for you for a couple of reasons. The solar eclipse is in your 10th, your career. It is your public life. It is the title after your name. It is the role that you play in this world. And so this eclipse is saying that over the next 6 months, there could be changes in your professional life or changes in the responsibilities that you carry in the world. The energy of the eclipse is pointing towards that Saturn in Aries. So it says something is shifting. Perhaps something either is coming to an end or, ironically, coming to a beginning, because Saturn's in Aries. It also could talk about this need to align your public, your professional life, your worldly life with your spiritual life, for example, or what's in your heart and your soul, for example. The energy of the eclipse, so the eclipse actually squares Uranus and Taurus. So you've had Uranus and Taurus since 2018, 2019. That's not a new story. But it is saying that for Taurus, there may be shifts and changes and pivots over the next 6 months. Every Taurus is going to live this time differently. We are at the end of Uranus and Taurus. Uranus will leave Taurus April 25th of 2026. And so in a way, this is like the last hurrah of Uranus and Taurus. So if there's something that you've been fighting or something that you know that it's like inside of you, that's the thing about Uranus. Uranus is like whatever is inside of you now needs to live outside of you. It can't be something that you compartmentalize or you're like, I'm going to do this later. So maybe in the case of career, there's something that you've always wanted to do or express. And maybe you've said, well, now's not the time. Maybe this eclipse is saying, now is the time. Gemini, so Mercury is your planet. Mercury is in Pisces at the moment. Pisces is your career sign, and actually Mercury is going to be in Pisces kind of like for the next 2 months, because at the end of February, Mercury will turn retrograde. Yes, it turns retrograde on the 26th of February. And so there's a bigger focus that will take you into the next 2 months around either your professional life, your duties, your responsibilities, your worldly ambitions and aims. And it's interesting because this is the same space that that Saturn was in over the last 3 years. So Saturn's gone, and so maybe it's time to step into the space that Saturn was occupying. With the retrograde coming up, just sort of listen for the things that you may need to rewind on or rework, because it's going to be a while until Mercury gets out of Pisces. I think it's not until April 14th. So big concentration on your career sign for the next couple of months. So there's that, and then there's tomorrow's eclipse. So we have a solar eclipse in something called your 9th sign. The 9th is not as concrete as career or your public life or the title after your name. The 9th is like, what do you believe in? What do you stand for? The 9th is the space of preachers and teachers and people who have podcasts or people who, write books and put their ideas out there. There's a sense of, in the 9th, we need to really look out towards the world and sort of figure out what we think is right and what we think is wrong. It's a space of lawyers, for example. So the 9th is saying, like the eclipse in the 9th is saying that this is going to be a big focus over the next 6 months. And maybe you go back to school. Maybe you're really thinking about getting a higher degree or another higher degree. Or maybe you are really sort of sitting with yourself on a deeper philosophical level, and it's like, what's right? What's wrong? What do I believe in? What do I stand for? You could look back to, say, 2018 or 2017-18 when we had eclipses last in Aquarius, for example. But this eclipse is pointing towards your what's called your 11th sign, with your friends, your community, your social circle, because the energy of the eclipse points towards Saturn now in Aries. So there's a sense of a lot of worldly parts of your astrology, 9, 10, 11, being activated with the astrology of the present moment and even the astrology of the eclipses. And so this is a big focus over the next 6 months about your public life, the role that you play in this world. Even if this world is your community, your small town, it doesn't have to be the world, capital T, capital W, the world, but it does say to you, like, what role are you playing? How are you taking action? What's your relationship with your community? And maybe the things that you feel are right, or maybe the things that you feel are wrong, but it's not to be in the moralization of the 9th. And it's certainly the 9th is a place where we can quickly moralize about what we believe in, what we stand for. I think to some degree, especially with the Pisces and even the Neptune influence, it's to really have some compassion and empathy. And that's what's really kind of building some of this narrative over the next 6 months, hopefully. But that said, we do have that Neptune in the 11th. That's a much bigger influence. And so it's really beginning to shift and shape and open up how you see the world on a much bigger level. Um, Cancer. So the moon is your planet, and we're about to have a solar eclipse. So typically, Cancer, you really feel the shifts and the ebbs and the changes in the astrology. And this eclipse is going to happen in something called your eighth. So we've talked about the eighth or the eighth room periodically. We even had, Saturn was in your eighth from 2020 to 2023. And so the eighth is a space where we have to look within, we have to face ourselves. And one of the ways that I frame the eighth is to say, imagine a life where every day is the same. Imagine a life where there's no adversity, you don't have to question anything. Do you grow? Absolutely not. And so this eclipse is saying that there needs to be some sort of prioritization on your self growth, your inner growth over the next 6 months. If you've been to therapy, you've been in the eighth room. So it's that kind of personal work, going within, really trying to see yourself. And the energy of this eclipse is pointing towards Saturn in your 10th. So we talked about this more last week. Now, Saturn is really, over the next 2 years, prioritizing your career, your public life, responsibilities, really stepping into bigger roles. And there's a lot of ways in which that can unfold, but I just want to go back to the eighth for a second, because if you look at yourself, if you're doing the work, if you're really digging into hidden or maybe even uncomfortable emotional spaces, how does that shift and change how you show up or the role that you play in this world? And so maybe with Saturn asking more of you, more responsibilities, more accountability, more public, stepping into public roles of mentorship or leadership, maybe there's a need to face yourself first, to face a fear, to face an insecurity, and that can help shift how you live Saturn and Aries over the next couple of years. We do have Neptune in this part of your chart. That's actually a much bigger conversation, but Neptune sort of says, as an astrologer, it's like, I don't care if they pay you $1 million to do what you do. I don't care if they give you all the power in the world. First, it has to feed your soul. So there is sort of this need to align your public and your professional life with something that actually feeds you and nourishes you on a much bigger level. Leo. So the sun is your planet, and we've got a solar eclipse this week. So a lot of big energies for Leo in general. And so when the sun is in Aquarius, which will be in Aquarius until February 18th, it's in your relationship sign. And Leo is one of the signs, a Taurus, Scorpio, and Aquarius are the others, where a lot of stuff is happening in your astrology at the moment. So tomorrow's eclipse is our first eclipse in a series of eclipses that take us into 2028, almost at 2018, 2028. That'll be back and forth between Leo and Aquarius. Aquarius, again, is your relationship sign. Relationships are a lot of things. It's not just romantic relationships like a marriage or partnership. I call those the capital R relationships, but it's also how do you connect, relate, and socialize to other people. The last time you had eclipses in this part of your astrology was 2017 and 2018, a very different time in your life. But this eclipse is saying that over the next 6 months, the big focus in your life, it's not the only focus, but the big focus is other people. And it's going to take a form that is very specific to your life. So maybe you are in a relationship and it's time for a new beginning in the relationship. It could be a big move. It could be a change in the structure of the relationship. It could be an end of relationship. But it also can say that new people can come into your life. It could be a new relationship. It could just be more socialization in general. And keep in mind, Leo, that whatever is happening with this eclipse, it's talking to Pluto in Aquarius. This is kind of a bigger conversation, but Pluto is in your relationship sign for a much longer time than the eclipses will be. So if new people are coming into your life, they're part of a larger structure and overhaul, change of structure and overhaul, I don't know if that's good English, that's happening over the coming years. And Pluto is saying that everything has to change with relationships, whatever structures, whatever patterns, it all has to change. So I know that's a big statement. The energy of the eclipse points now towards Saturn in Aries. Aries is Leo's 9th sign, so maybe it's looking at relationships and sort of, your beliefs about relationships, or your belief what a relationship should be. And maybe it's about making sure that you and a partner are on the same page, that you share the same values, for example. These, like I said, these are just examples. The eclipse is also square Uranus, and this is the thing that I'm kind of circling as an astrologer. It says that over the next 6 months, Leo, there could be changes in your life that are not small changes, because Uranus can sometimes shift the narrative. Keep in mind, you've had Uranus in your career sign since 2018 and 2019. So this energy about relationships, about career, it's about, again, what you believe in, what you stand for, the role that you play in this world. And so things are really shifting and moving, and this eclipse is going to directly connect to the eclipse in Leo that we're going to have on August 12th of 2026. Yeah, there you go. Virgo. So Mercury is your planet, and Mercury, it's in Pisces right now. It's actually going to be in Pisces all the way until April 14th. That's a little bit of an unusual amount of time, because Mercury will turn retrograde at the end of February. So for you, Virgo, Pisces is something called your relationship sign. It says that there's a big focus on other people, and maybe you're like, wait a second, that sounds kind of familiar, because Saturn was in this space for 3 years. So whatever is, even though Saturn has left Pisces, and maybe you're thinking, thank God Saturn's out of Pisces, but even though Saturn has left Pisces, Mercury is in the same space now. It's kind of like gone into the space that Saturn once occupied. Now, Saturn works on a very different time scale than Mercury, but what Mercury is now saying, you need to occupy the space that Saturn once did, in the sense you need to find your accountability, you need to find your authority, you need to focus on the themes and the patterns that were really building a narrative 2023, 2024, 2025, all the way into last Friday, February 13th. So it's about relationships. That also includes not just romantic relationships and partnerships, it also includes socialization. How do you connect? How do you relate to other people? But that said, we have a solar eclipse this week, and for Virgo, this is happening in something called the sixth sign. And so the sixth sign is our health and wellness, it's our day-to-day routines and habits, it's the sort of the structural function of our day-to-day life, like our routines, our schedule. So it's a very operational space. Like, this is what really, you want to know what like runs our lives, it's like the six. And so an eclipse in this space is saying that over the next 6 months, there's a change in this space. Maybe you decide to make changes in your diet, your health and wellness, you start going to the gym, going for a walk, I don't know. Maybe you're like, I need to change the structures, I need to have a different relationship with my schedule and my time, and do things differently, or reprioritize my time differently. It also could be service, because there is an element of service with Aquarius. We don't always think about that, but Virgo is a service-driven sign. It's not the only way that Virgo expresses itself, but maybe one of the ways in which you live the next 6 months is also to serve and to help other people, for example. Keep in mind that whatever's going on with this eclipse, it's in the same place that Pluto is now, at least since November of 2024. So Pluto is talking about bigger structural overhauls, and the eclipse might, especially as we get into 2027, is starting to push these changes more to the forefront. That's a bigger conversation. That said, this eclipse points towards your eighth. The energy that is received by the eclipse is Saturn in Aries in your eighth. And so there's an element also of health and wellness, but the health is not just physical, it's also emotional health and wellness. I talked more about this last week. It's kind of a big conversation, so I would listen to last week's explanation. But Saturn in Aries for you is saying, to some degree, it's time to prioritize your emotional health and wellness. So what sort of things are you going to do about it? Or maybe looking at the relationship between the physical body and the emotional body. Something's showing up somatically sometimes is actually emotional pain that we've been holding on to, for example. But see how this is really shaping and shifting the next 6 months for you. And I would say just in general, but briefly, Saturn in the eighth, it's a big transit, and it really asks us to look within. and to make changes within. And whatever you feel called to start to excavate and excise and do that deep work, maybe this eclipse is helping you to really focus and make that change over the next 6 months. This eclipse is making what's called a square to Uranus and Taurus. It does talk about a need to see things differently, to break out of old patterns around beliefs. It could be beliefs about the world, it could be beliefs about yourselves. And seeing things differently can create a much needed radical shift. Libra. So Venus is your planet, and Venus right now is in Pisces. It's in Pisces until about like the second week of March. But for you, Libra, Pisces is something called your sixth sign. So for the next 4 weeks, it's about your health and wellness. It's about showing up. It's about taking care of the details, organization. And it's interesting because Venus is in the same space that Saturn was for 3 years. Now Saturn's moved on, and so maybe Venus is trying to capitalize or occupy the same space that Saturn was really getting you to work on. So if you were really working on your health and wellness for the last 3 years, then Venus there is like to inhabit it. It's to live it. It's to experience it. It's to revitalize it, for example. If it was service, it could be that. It could be, really your work and your attention to detail. You'd sort of see how this is showing up in your own life. But then there is the eclipse tomorrow. So this solar eclipse is going to be in something called your fifth. It says that over the next 6 months, the focus and priority is you. Let me explain. This isn't about being selfish or narcissistic. It's about really making sure that you are looking at yourself. And looking at yourself for one person can mean really taking yourself seriously, really expressing yourself, sometimes even being in the pleasure of expressing who we are and our individuality. This eclipse could also be about needing to look at the self in terms of the things that are maybe not helpful expressions of self. And sometimes we hide behind a false self, or we hide behind the version that we think we should be, or maybe the version our parents think we should be, even if we're 40 years old. And so there's a need to really look within with this eclipse. For some Libras, it's a very creative time to get back to that spark, that passion, that joy. For some Libras, it's about children. And obviously this isn't going to be relevant for everybody, but maybe even pregnancy. The eclipse does make a square to Uranus, and Uranus is in its last legs of its time in your eighth. And this is a much bigger conversation, and Uranus is very specific to your own life and your own journey. But over the last 6-7 years, you've needed to really do a lot of inner work. And Uranus, to some degree, is Prometheus. It's one of its archetypal expressions. And so the lights have been needed to turn on, if that's even proper English, in the most hidden parts of yourself over the last 6-7 years. So the fifth, to go back to the fifth, it's the self, it's the ego. But there's positive ego, self-esteem. There's negative ego when we're being a jerk. But with the square to Uranus over the next 6 months, it's saying it is to strip away the negative ego, the false self, to look within and to really make a deep transformation. Oh, I forgot to talk about Saturn and Aries, because the energy of the eclipse points towards Saturn and Aries, and it's your relationship sign. So yes, I had somebody say to me on Facebook, but wait a second, I'm happily single, I don't want a relationship. And I'm like, don't worry, Saturn is not holding the gun, it's not getting forcing you to get into a relationship. It's just saying relationships are your priority right now. And that means that you're not an island. You cannot do everything alone. And you are a Libra at the end of the day. It is a very relational sign, but Libra is also about putting things in balance. And so this eclipse also says, don't forget about you. Don't sacrifice yourself. Focusing on how to put relationships in balance, and maybe even to see things that you haven't seen before, or even to see things about yourself. So it is a big eclipse for you, but not in the direct ways like it is for the other signs. But relationships are on the receiving end of this eclipse. Scorpio. So Mars is your planet, and Mars is presently in Aquarius. So Aquarius is what's called your fourth sign. So until early March, I think it's March 3rd, the focus and priority is home, family, roots, foundation. It could be a move, it could be a living situation. Maybe you're cleaning out everything. Mars is typically not a sit still kind of planet. Mars needs a project, and maybe you're doing a lot of home projects at the moment. Sometimes when Mars is in this part of the chart, we have a lot of visitors. The home is not quiet. It's a little bit loud because Mars can get a bit noisy. Mars is in the same sign as an eclipse that we have tomorrow, so February 17th. And this is a big eclipse for Scorpio. And you have not had an eclipse in this part of your astrology since 2017 and 2018, so it's been a while. And it says to some degree that for the next 6 months, home and family will see some sort of change. It could be a change of address, it could be a change within, it could be something around a family member, it could be starting a family, for example. But it's a big eclipse in the sense that it marks one of the, what are they called, the four structural signs of Scorpio's astrology. This eclipse also points towards Saturn newly in Aries. So Aries for you is your sign of projects, work, health and wellness, service to other people. And maybe it's the service that you do to your family, or it's needing to put things in order with your household, or like I said, new projects, renovations. But this eclipse also squares Uranus, and this is the one that I really want to highlight because Uranus has been in your relationship sign since 2018-19. And for a lot of Scorpios, life is not as it was in 2018-2019. A lot of things have shifted and changed in the last 7 years. And so Uranus is in a part of your astrology that you know. It's been there since 2018-2019, and Uranus will leave the space in April. But this eclipse, in a way, is like the last hurrah of Uranus and Taurus. It's saying you've done so much work, Scorpio, and a lot of that work has been around changing yourself, changing how you relate and connect to people. And sometimes that really starts at an early age, in the sense of the patterns that we receive, the dynamics that we receive from our parents, ancestral patterns. And so it's like that one last thing that needs to change and push. And whatever this eclipse is activating, let's not forget that Pluto is now in Aquarius. It'll be there for a very long time. So home and family and roots and foundations is already an area that you're doing some much bigger work. But it's saying a lot may happen over the next 6 months. Things may look different by the time you get to August. We'll see if that's actually true for Scorpio, but there's potential for that. And that may require you to step into the space of the changes of relationship that you've already been working on and express yourself differently, show up differently, be of service differently, take on projects differently. But it's, like I said, it's a big eclipse for Scorpio. Sagittarius, it's going to be a long one. Sagittarius, so Jupiter is your planet. Jupiter is in Cancer. It'll be in Cancer until the end of June. Just sort of as a reminder, the second half of the year will be a bit different for you, Sagittarius, because the energy of your sign will start to point towards Jupiter in Leo starting around July 1st. But that's a conversation for later. And for you, Sagittarius, now that Saturn is out of your fourth, what began to come to conclusion when Saturn reached the end of Pisces, so January and into February, all the way into February 13th, because Saturn will not return to this part of your astrology. It's about family, it's about home, it's about past and memories, but it also is about really building a foundation, whether that's a physical foundation, whether that's an internal foundation. As of last week, February 13th, Saturn is now in your fifth. So over the next 2 years, it's about taking yourself and taking your talents seriously. It could be looking at self-esteem. It could be looking at the ego. It could be a creative time. It could be really a time of growth and maturity and how you express yourself, for example. But that's also linking back to this eclipse that we're going to have tomorrow, February 17th. It's going to be in your third sign, voice, communication, how you think and listen and learn. So while there is this bigger focus throughout 2026 and beyond on you and sort of your creative talents, gifts, and abilities, there's also this focus that really centers over the next 6 months on how you speak, how you listen, how you learn, how you communicate, how you process information. Because the role of the third is to help us to become aware of our environment and be able to communicate with it. For some Sagittarius, it's travel, it's education, it's taking classes, it's learning. For some Sagittariuses, it's really about the voice. And voice is both literal, but it's also your ability to share yourself, to speak, for people to truly to see you and hear you, for example. And for some Sags, if you're a writer, it could be a time of starting a manuscript or working on a book. For if you're a teacher, maybe you're really focusing on teaching something that is truly an expression of you. It's a creative expression of you. This energy is square Uranus and Taurus is in your 6th sign. And so it's really talking about the shifts in, these are shifts that have been with you since 2018-19, like the shifts in how you run your life and those sort of the day-to-day duties and responsibilities, a shift in health and wellness. So this is not, let's say, a big dynamic eclipse like it is for some of the other signs, but it does create the energy of movement and change. It creates creativity. And if it is a very creative time for you for the next 6 months, then what do you do with it? How does it come into your day-to-day life? How do you change your focus and priority? Like I have a client who is writing a book and she had to really change her schedule so she could really make time to write the book. That's just an example. And so that might be where Uranus is saying you need to change your day-to-day habits to actually make the things happen. Capricorn. So Saturn is your planet, and as of last week, February 13th, it's in Aries, your 4th sign. So the 4th sign, there's 12 in total. The 4th represents the base and foundation of your life. And so for the next 2 years, your focus is on home, family, roots, foundation. It could be starting a family. It could be buying a home, starting a relationship. It could be putting down roots. It could just be family just as a general topic, or relationships with ancestors, ancestral patterns. So listen to last week's recording because I talked more in depth about what that is. But this eclipse, it's not, let's say, big compared to some of the other signs, but in a way it's big for you because it activates your planet Saturn. So for you, Capricorn, Aquarius is something called your 2nd sign of money, income, material stability, and security. It's the money you make. It's what you need. I mean, as human beings, we need the basics: food, water, shelter, heat. We should be so lucky, of course. And so that part of your life is a big focus over the next 6 months. So maybe you are thinking about making more money. Maybe you're taking actions. You're meeting with financial planners or advisors, for example. Maybe you're cutting spending or implementing a budget, for example. Or maybe it's not monetary. Maybe it's self-worth and value, and how there is a transaction of time and energy in your life, and maybe you want to make some changes, for example. Certainly Saturn changing signs, and now it's in what's called your 4th sign, is a shift in priorities in your life. It's not what it was over the last 5, 6, 7, even 8 years ago. So with this eclipse in your 2nd, it actually activates you. It could be changes in values in terms of like your relationship with family in the past and home, or maybe some of you are buying a home, or maybe you are thinking about creating material stability for you and your family, for example. This eclipse points towards not just Saturn and Aries, but also Neptune. And so Neptune is conjunct you at the moment. That's kind of a conversation we need to keep coming back to because there's just way too many things to talk about this week. And Neptune is making you very sensitive at the moment. And this is going to be well present throughout the year. Neptune is saying it's a priority shift, but it needs to shift within. It needs to shift in your heart. You need to feel things. You need to open up. You need to heal. You need to release. And so maybe a lot of things are moving after all for you, Capricorn, but they might not be physical. They might be internal. The eclipse also squares Uranus and Taurus. Taurus is your fifth sign. And it's also saying that it's a time where it's sort of bridging or building upon the bigger changes in yourself. Like, you're not the same person you were in 2018, 2019 when Uranus first went to Taurus. And if that statement is true, then it's going to be really true over the next 6 months. So it's really asking you to make some big changes, big internal, emotional, and personal changes that really match this new time that we are in. Aquarius. So we got a big deal Aquarius solar eclipse tomorrow, February 17th. And so this eclipse, of course, is in your sign, or it's in the sign of your rising. And it's saying that over the next 6 months, there is a lot of change. I know you're like, I don't want change. I'm so sorry. The last time we had eclipses in Aquarius and Leo was 2017 and 2018. So you can use that as a marker. If you wanted to go back even more, you can go to 98, 99. Yeah, 98, 99 is correct in 2000, but I meant to say 2008, 2009. I went back too far. So when you have an eclipse in your sign, and even if it's your birthday and you have an eclipse on the 17th or the 18th or the 16th, it is a time of powerful new beginnings. Life is not going to be quiet for the next 6 months. That's just how it works. It says that it's a change in the narrative. You have to sort of listen for what it is. I can think of an Aquarius client, for example, that moved to the other side of the country, got a new job. So that's like that level of new beginnings. It really also depends on your own personal astrology, but this is bringing you into a period into 2028 where life is shifting and changing. This eclipse is pointing towards Saturn. Saturn's your planet. It's now in Aries. Aries is about action, new beginnings. In the case of your own astrology, your voice, how you speak, how you communicate, how you listen, how you learn. And so this is saying that you may be speaking more about things, could be teaching about things over the next 6 months, or maybe it's about the choices that you make, because the third is also where we weigh our options and hopefully to have the maturity and responsibility, Saturn, to make the right choices. So you may be symbolically over the next 6 month plus having to look at different options. And sometimes we choose things without listening to ourselves. So there's this real need to listen to our intuition, and maybe that's the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. And I will say, and I said this to Capricorn, that Neptune conjunct your ruler, Saturn, is making you very sensitive at the moment. And maybe you need to listen more to your intuition. Maybe you need to cultivate that intuition. Maybe that's dreams, maybe that's meditating. It's sort of to feel how that is showing up in your life. Now, the square to Uranus is the big one to look at, because it says that already since 2018-19, you've had changes either in the household, changes with family, changes in your living situation. And while Uranus is going to leave this part of your astrology in April, this is like the last hurrah. And so maybe there's a move, maybe the move is within, maybe there's a lot of shifts and changes in the household over the next 6 months, but it's not a quiet time to be an Aquarius or Aquarius rising. Happy birthday, by the way. And finally, Pisces. So Pisces, Jupiter is your planet. I almost said Saturn. Jupiter is your planet, and Jupiter is in Cancer at least until the end of June. So there's this sort of water connection. Cancer is emotional. It's care. It's comfort. Pisces is also a water sign. It's more about that empathy and compassion for everything. And so maybe you're just feeling very sensitive at the moment in general. But that's not the big focus at the moment, although the sun is going to go in Pisces on the 18th, so that's Wednesday. Happy early birthday. We're going to talk more about this next week, but the real spotlight right now is that Aquarius solar eclipse that we're going to have tomorrow, February 17th. And Aquarius for you is something called your 12th sign. There's 12 signs in general. It's like you're Pisces, and you got all the other 11 signs around you, and they all represent different domains of your life. It could be career, it could be relationships, it could be your health and wellness, for example. And for you, Aquarius, the 12th sign is a very spiritual place. It's where we begin to open up the door to what is beyond this world. And so for some people, that's elusive, maybe that's dreams or daydreaming, but in reality, it is a space, and I always say this to my clients, physics teaches us that we can only see 5% of our universe. In the room that you're in presently, listening to my voice, you only have the capacity to see 5% of it because only 5% is visible by light. That's actual science. So if that is the case, what is it that you are not seeing that is both literal, that is both metaphoric? And so to some degree, this eclipse is showing you over the next 6 months what you are not seeing. It could be a light bulb, metaphorically speaking. It could be a realization from within. It could be the discovery and opening to a much greater part of yourself that you haven't even realized is there. But it's for you to meditate and to reflect on that sort of 5% versus 95% framework, because for me, at least this is my Sag speaking, my Sag rising speaking, I want to know what's in that 95%, or maybe that's my Scorpio sun speaking. So for some Pisces, the next 6 months are very spiritual. It's very internal. It's time to rest and reflect, meditate, to listen to your intuition, to cultivate a greater sense of meaning and purpose in your life. For some Pisces, it's a time of recuperation. It's a time to really come to the end of a great chapter and story. And what I was thinking when I started to talk about your sign, but I sort of forgot about it, is that Saturn is actually finally out of your sign. That should have been my lead, because it was 3 years in your sign. And so Saturn, the energy, it's moved on. And so maybe you need to rest because it's been a really big climb over the last 3 years. And maybe you need to focus on not just your physical health and wellness, but also your emotional and spiritual health and wellness. The energy of the eclipse will point towards Saturn. It's now in your second sign of money, income, material stability, and security. Maybe it's literally to some degree about money. It's being spotlighted over the next 6 months, but I also feel that it's looking at these bigger questions about values. And of course, we need the basics, a roof over our head. We need money in the bank. And again, we should be so lucky. But as you start to search yourself and start to question and go within, maybe the things that you thought were important at the start of the year are perhaps not so important now. And that represents a shift of values. And maybe that has a monetary reflection in the sense that you spend your money differently or you invest your money differently. But don't forget that the next 6 months to some degree is about really investing in your emotional and spiritual health and wellness. And if that means to make peace, to let go, to come to an endings, that could also be the way that this eclipse also unfolds. So there you go. That is your look at the astrology of this week, February 16th through 22nd in 2026. There was a lot to pack in. I know we ran late. There was probably more I could even talk about, not just Pisces season, but a little bit more of the nuances. And I think we'll probably talk more about the Saturn-Neptune conjunction next week, because it's just so much going on. And it's very likely that when we look back at February 2026, that we really see the seeds of something, a shift of something that might take some time to play out. So I appreciate you all. I will see you next week. And for those that are joining me this weekend for the Module 1 of Energetic Sciences, where we learn about the invisible fabric of reality, we get to feel it, we get to shift our consciousness, we get to become like an acupuncture needle for the planet. You can sign up. The link is in the show notes for Module 1 Energetic Sciences. It's also on my website, empoweringastrology.com. You can get in touch with me if you have questions, and you can watch the free introduction that I recorded on February 5th. So I hope to see you. And if not, I will see you next week. I know it's a fire horse year. All I know about Chinese astrology is that I am a horse. I'm an earth horse, not a fire horse. But I think in general, fire as an energy, and certainly in the second half of the year, we're going to have a lot more fire and air in the astrology. We're getting ready to move and to have some changes. So there you go. I will see you all next week. Take care. Bye-bye.